And we're recording. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to bring you this video today. I've invited my good friend and co-author, Justin Watson, to join us. Justin is one of my favorite conversational partners. It feels like it doesn't really matter the topic. We end up having both a raucous and an intellectually stimulating conversation.
Likewise.
Somehow in the same topics. So I'm super excited to do this video today. So Justin, please introduce yourself to the folks, the people, and I'll let you tell them the story of how we met.
Thanks, Casey. Hi, Casey's fans and friends. I am Justin Watson, and I am a science fiction, fantasy, and alternate history writer. And the way I met Casey is actually really interesting. Our mutual friend and mentor, Tom Kratman, who's also our co-author on the Romanov Rescue, needed an objective opinion about my first completed attempt at a novel. That's actually how we met, was that he needed someone who did not yet know me, and whose opinion on writing he actually respected. So that's actually how it occurred so he sent, because Tom has taken a vow not to read friends' work, right? Like, unless it's actually in the line of duty and we're actually going to publish it together. He's the editor or the co-author. So he sent you a manuscript from some random dude you'd never heard of or met. And you graciously read the whole thing and provided me with a ton of great feedback. And that novel is, we've got a lot of projects going on, but that novel is on the list to get revised and hopefully published someday. So it was a secondary world fantasy, but with more modern, like 1950s or 60s technology. So I had a lot of fun with that project. So then we met in person at LibertyCon back in, was it 17 or 18?
I don't know, man. They all kind of run together for me.
Yeah, I think I got 3 before the unknown virus of unspecified origin shut everything down.
Yeah, man.
We got to go to 3 in person, so I guess that was 17.
Yeah, probably. That's probably right.
So that was the first time I met you.
Yeah. So that's right. I was thinking you were just going to say that we met at LibertyCon. I had forgotten about the manuscript piece of it, but that's right. I get this email from Tom one day, and I'll have Tom Kratman on here eventually at some point too, so that all of you can meet him and decide whether you love him or hate him, because there's no between with Tom.
Very few people are lukewarm on Tom.
That's right. I jokingly call him my favorite misogynist. But the truth is, he's not really a misogynist. He's one of those men that like loves women and puts them on a pedestal. But it's he's been labeled a misogynist by others quite frequently.
And in everything else-ist you can imagine.
Yeah. So anyway, I'd forgotten. So Tom sends me this very eloquent email, which is peak Tom, of course, and explains that he's acquainted with this aspiring writer who's very promising, but that for personal reasons he can't. He's promised not to read friends' work, like you said, unless it's in a professional capacity. Which I the more I think about it, I mean, obviously I'm not like trying to delve into Tom's personal motivations for things, but I kind of understand that, right? Like. Yeah. If you're a person who is unflinchingly honest, as Tom is, you can easily ruin a friendship by being like, dude, you need a lot of work on this,
And my understanding is, you can ask him more details, but I don't think this is any secret. My understanding is that's what happened.
Yeah.
At a certain point is, Tom is not, I mean, I don't think he's overbearing, but then again, you and I are used to working for, Uncle Sam, and your commanders don't always have to be gentle with your feelings. So I don't think he's particularly harsh in how he gives criticisms, but he's not gonna blow smoke up your ass.
Right. He's totally blunt. Yeah. He's blunt and to the point, and especially when you're talking about creative endeavors, right? Where it's like, okay, here's a piece of my soul. Please tell me how to make it better. The blunt critique can be even for me, I'd be lying if I said that this wasn't true. Even for me, it can take a minute. Like, I have to read edits and then like back away, reset, and then come and read them again, because otherwise, like, you can get your feelings hurt, so.
Like, do I actually have to challenge this person to a duel now? Like,
That's right.
or is this valid? Maybe this is valid, but I also want to punch him in the face. Yeah. Actually, one of the things I found so far, and I'm a very young author. I have our collaborative novel and I have a few short stories out there, but I've taken editing pretty well. And it's because my first editor, while I was, toiling in obscurity by myself, writing things, hoping someday they would see the light of day, was my wife. My wife, Michelle, graciously has read almost everything I've written, and she does not let me get away with any shit. If I'm being self-indulgent in the manuscript, she's going to call me out on it right away. Like, if she's like, you just wanted this to be there, it doesn't fit in this story. And God bless her, I would get so butthurt for the first year that she would help me with this. I'd get so pouty boo-boo lips about it all. And she kept, like, for some reason, she never just told me to stuff it. And not
because she loves you.
Yeah. But eventually I got to the point where I stopped being a douche. And because I'd been beaten up so much by someone who loved me, and beaten up in a loving, developmental way, of course, that when I started getting edits from Tom and from others, it was like, oh, okay. I don't take it as personally as I would if I hadn't been softened up.
Yeah. That's valid. It's interesting that Michelle has read everything that you've read and is kind of like your first reader, first editor. I've noticed among writer spouses and significant others that it tends to go either that way or the route Easy has taken, and that I know like Bridget Correa has taken, where they're like, I'm not reading any of your shit, nothing. Like,
they're both
you. And his, so I asked him one time about this, and Easy's response I thought was pretty illuminating. And he's not, he does read, he can read, but reading is not his go-to relaxation or pleasure activity, right? And so he told me, he was like, listen, I love you, and I need to be constantly your cheerleader. And much like Tom and like you and like me, my husband comes from a military background. And so his method of giving critique was formed by training young aerial gunners. so he did not want to be in the position of giving me critique and having me be butthurt about it,
you see in the margins, were you dropped as a baby, or did they actually spike you like
Are you
fortunately Michelle was a little more politicking. What's that? Yeah. I remember. Okay.
Are you hypoxic?
Did you write this while you were at altitude without oxygen? Were you trying to fly the helicopter at the same time, Casey? Blink twice.
Do one thing at a time. Here you go. But yeah, he and it was funny. It was like, oh, okay, all right, fair enough. I respect that. That you need to be my what's the word I'm looking for? Unwavering cheerleader. And not that reading my work would make him waver from that, but
sure. Like, no, I think they're both totally valid ways to go. Like Michelle will have nothing to do with any business aspect of either my day job or writing. And she didn't like the social stuff in the Army. To be truthful, that was not her favorite thing. She had some really great friends amongst the community, but like, she wasn't all about socials and wives' coffees and stuff like that. So like, there's ways in which she's like, yeah, I'll be here and I'll support you, and this is something I can do with joy. And then there's other things that she's like, yeah, it's just not my thing. And you figure that out. That's what makes a great marriage.
Well, she's a smart woman. I've met her. I haven't like had long conversations with her, but that strikes me as a smart stance, because you've got to, it's just like that old saying, you got to pick your battles, right? You got to choose choose the method of supporting your spouse that is not going to be a burden on you, because that just breeds resentment, I think.
Yeah. When you're forcing the square peg into the round hole.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I will say, I will give one funny anecdote from her editing of me.
Sure.
My co-authors, I don't actually write graphic sex scenes.
Uh-huh.
And it's because I tried to do it once and it cracked my wife up. I was like, if I'm not selling you on this, maybe it's not my strong suit.
Well, to be fair, that might be the toughest audience for a sex scene ever, is the person with whom you actually engage in sexual activity.
Yeah. But I remember I was like, okay, we're gonna put that away for a second. I'm gonna focus on characterization and action. All right, we're good.
That's funny. That is a funny anecdote. I wonder, maybe it's a good thing Izzy doesn't read my stuff. Oh, so funny. So
I've read a few of your books. I think it's tasteful.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. That's what I'm going for, is tasteful nudity. We've kind of alluded to this, but tell the people about the Army.
Oh, Lord.
Or at least your participation in it. You were in the Army, correct?
Gosh, there was some, there's a book called The Last Centurions. It says the Army is filled, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact quote, because last time I read it, I was 19, but.
Is this Ringo's Last Centurion?
No, sorry. I apologize. Latraguy's The Last Centurion. I've definitely read John Ringo's The Last Centurion too, and that's awesome. The Last Centurion, French novel that was translated into English. I don't read French. I'm not that bougie. But it was translated into English. It was a novel about Vietnam. So it was a historical fiction novel that was pretty darn close to actual history.
Yeah.
And it was talking about, the French Indochinese War and all that stuff. And one of the French Foreign Legionnaires says, the army is filled with scoundrels, thieves, and murderers. And somebody says, why do you keep re-enlisting? And he says, it's the only place you find true friends.
Yeah.
I was, so straight out of high school, I went to West Point. I managed to graduate through the grace of God and a little last minute effort. And I commissioned into the field artillery, which was my second choice. I was going to try for aviation. I'll go ahead and admit that. But I was not high enough in my class. I knew I wasn't going to get it. So I got effectively my first real choice was artillery. Then I went into the service and spent the next year on, year off between Iraq, Afghanistan, and one trip to Kuwait. I loved it and hated it, which is, I think, what we all think, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the parts that were valuable or irreplaceable. You weren't going to get those experiences or meet those people or forge those bonds anywhere else than in the service. That being said, so many of us are libertarian or right-wing bent because we learn through long, painful experience that the government doesn't manage anything well.
It's funny that you say that. I think the core of my retirement speech is going to be, the Air Force does not love you.
That's actually, Tom says it frequently, and I've heard it a few other places. You can love the Army all you want, but she's a faithless whore, and she's never going to love you back.
Never love you back. I've said before, I've told people before that the Air Force is like a bad boyfriend, right? Like,
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah.
You'll be like, I'm done with you. I'm not taking your abuse anymore. I'm getting out. And he'll dangle this like, hey, but here's this plush assignment. Don't you want to go to Japan? In front of you, and you're like, oh, I do want to go to Japan. Okay, fine. It's like, I love you. I'll never hurt you again. I'm not trying to make light of domestic violence. Obviously, that's not my intent here. This is dark humor. Please forgive me.
No, definitely not trying to make light of anyone's real pain, and I'm sorry if anyone's hurt by this. But it's a really good metaphor. It's a really good, because I remember I can point out exactly. So I got through West Point, which again, like, there's a lot that was valuable about that experience, but a lot of it I think could be better, could be managed better.
Yeah, USOF is the same. USOF is
Yeah,
the same.
yeah. I mean, you went through the exact same thing in blue and
Yeah,
a little more sunshine,
a little higher altitude.
a little higher altitude.
Yeah.
But for me, getting through West Point kind of dampened my enthusiasm for the Army a little bit.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
I went in thinking I was going to be, career 20 years at least, maybe longer if they'll keep me. And by the time I got out of West Point, I was already kind of questioning that. I was like, okay, there's aspects of this I love. Like, I actually love being in the field. I love troops.
Mhm.
I loved command and all that sort of thing. So I get to my first post, and it's kind of, it was wonderful when I was a fire support officer and a platoon leader,
Mhm.
but I finished up on staff
Mm.
my last deployment, and I was really quite done.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll hurt
And then
anyone.
they were like, fortunately though, I had been wounded on my first tour. That's not fortunate. Sorry.
Phrasing?
My brain jumped a couple rungs forward on that ladder. Let me back up. So,
by all means.
So you don't have to edit that out. I'll own that one. So I got Germany coming out of training, which was awesome.
Yeah.
And that's a bit of a long story. I was supposed to go somewhere else, but fortunately that place was full. So Germany, which was great.
Yeah, twist my arm.
Yeah. Loved being a fire support officer, even though I did get wounded by an IED. Like, that didn't really deter. It hurt, but it really didn't deter me.
Sure.
Loved being a platoon leader. That was good. Battery executive officer, great. Not saying it was without stress. And deploying for 12 to 15 months at a time sucks, but it's also kind of what we signed on for.
Yeah.
But then when I got my staff job, it was like, oh man, this just sucks. Like, this is terrible. I don't want to do this anymore. Wah, wah, wah. And then the Army, when I went to the intermediate course where they train you, it's the transition from lieutenant to captain, and they start training you to take command of a higher level unit or be a higher level staff officer. They fill out your preferences for where you're going next after your training, and they're like, oh, you have 2 deployments and a Purple Heart, so you get first pick of where you go. So exactly that sort of thing where they're like, you can go to Fort Carson, Colorado after Germany. And it's like, oh, well, okay.
Okay. Twist it. Okay, I'll go.
Yeah. And then I walked right into an Afghanistan tour again on staff, which again almost broke me.
Yeah.
But then they were like, oh, you did a great job. Here's your artillery battery to command. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'll stay. Yeah. So it was just one thing after another where they beat you up, and then they're like, oh, here's that thing you really wanted and we're shooting for. Yeah. So great metaphor. It's like you're a writer or something.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Thanks. Oh gosh, I just had, like, I lost my train of thought. I was so into your stories, your Army stories. Let's talk about Romanov Rescue then, shall we?
Okay, yeah, no, let's
so I came late to this project, and I'm gonna flash the cover up so that people can see it. This is a book that
is an awesome cover.
It's such a beautiful cover. This is a book that is currently available. You can order this on Amazon, go to your local bookstore, grab it, whatever you like. It is an alternate history that postulates what happens if not all of the Romanov children are murdered. And like I started to say, I came late to this project. This, Tom invited me in after you guys had already kind of started talking about this. So how did you get involved in this, and what was sort of the genesis of this project?
So it was a conjoining of 2 or 3 different ideas all at once. So the first was actually unrelated to the Russian Revolution in terms of when it was its inception. Let's put it that way. And that's that Tom, for years, has been postulating that would have been possible in 1941, prior to our entry in World War II, for Germany, through the use of bombers and transport aircraft, to put enough boots on the ground in Britain to force a peace. That most people remember about World War II Britain, rightfully remember Churchill and his ultimate defiance and all the amazing rhetoric and the sheer fortitude that kept them in the war. He had opponents who were nowhere near so committed.
Right.
So it is a matter of, if you can put the Churchill government on the back foot and they lose power, theoretically at least, you can get a separate peace with Britain so that Germany can concentrate on war with Russia.
Yeah.
So that was the first idea that existed in our consciousnesses of alternate history, for something Tom was really passionate about. Then Monalisa Foster, who did write a lot of this book with us, but we'll talk about nothing bad as to why she exited the project. It just wasn't really in her wheelhouse, and not really targeted at her specific fan base. But she was writing a short story for an alternate history anthology about the Night Witches, the female Russian pilots in World War II who were, bombing German lines. And Monalisa Foster is a survivor of communism, and is probably the only person on Earth who hates communism worse than you, me, and Tom put together. So hates it so much she didn't want to write about Soviets.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So that, she was like, no, they're not the heroes if they're Soviet communists. How can I make them not Soviet communists? And she brought this up to Tom at LibertyCon.
Yeah.
And Tom said, well, and through his keen and analytical process, was like, well, you have to go all the way back and probably save at least one Romanov to unify the White Russians. And then light bulb kind of went on, and what he and I had been talking about, what Mona Lisa were talking about, he realized it's like, oh, this could be all one great big tapestry. So that kind of happened. And then honestly, he was like, you know what, Justin, I think we should bring in Casey too. And I was like, I like Casey. I'll be honest with you, I like Casey. I owe Casey a lot. She's gotten me invitations to a bunch of anthologies. But why in particular are we inviting Casey? And she's like, he said, have you ever flown a plane? And I said,
that's funny, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but go ahead.
Well, no, and that is the funny part. And I was like, well, I mean, Casey's great. I mean, if we have 3 authors, might as well have 4. So then he brought you in, and that was the writing quartet that began. And good you did, because now Mona Lisa's onto other projects, and now we're at least a trio. But yeah, go ahead. The air crew story is funny.
Well, it's so Tom approached me, and I think it was it at LibertyCon or was it via email? I don't remember actually.
I think it very first it was an in-person at LibertyCon.
Yeah,
I think so. He just floated it to you, and you are the person who, if you can make it work, you're going to.
Well, I am a hoe for new ideas. That is a true statement. I have never met an idea that I really want to say no to. And I absolutely love alternate history. I just completed my own alternate history trilogy. Just released the 3rd book in that, which if I read
the first 2, they're amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. If I were a smart woman, I would have that cover also ready to go to put up on here, but I don't. And so so I love this kind of stuff. And so Tom approaches me with this idea, and he specifically told me that one of the reasons why he thought that I would be a good fit for the team was because there's this plot line running through that follows the career of the L-59 Zeppelin, which was for those of you who aren't familiar, the L-59 was a real Imperial German Zeppelin in World War I that did some super heroic stuff. It was known as the Africa ship. And I believe it, to this day, still holds the world record for the longest lighter-than-air combat mission ever. Naturally, there aren't a lot of lighter-than-air combat missions these days, but still, that's pretty effing impressive, right? So, so anyway, Tom brought me in, I think in large part to write about that. However, comma, pause for dramatic effect. While I have flown an airplane and I have flown a helicopter, I have never flown a Zeppelin. And it turns out they're not at all the same.
You don't cover that in the academy?
No, that was not, there was never a Zeppelin week in UPT or anything like that. So I did a lot of research. And one of the things that I love about Tom is that I have never met somebody with better Google foo than Tom. The man is like, and I don't know if it's his training as an attorney, but the man's research skills are second to none. Like I could come to him with the most obscure thing, like, hey, Tom, what do you think about this? And he would come back with like half a dozen links and a full hour-long YouTube video and authentic pictures. Yes, Tom is a master at research. Mm-hmm. And like you were saying, he won't he doesn't accept, no, I can't find that,
Yeah. Like you better really have searched.
That's right. That's right. How did you meet Tom anyway?
Okay, well that's actually an interesting story. So as I said, I was wounded in 2006 in an actual EFP, explosive force projectile, hit my up armored Humvee. My company commander was killed, as was the gunner. The driver and I were blown clear.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate. I didn't have any traumatic brain injury. All the damage that was done was largely extremity damage. I had a broken arm and a broken leg, but everything else was just cuts and bruises and minor burns. And you can imagine that recovering from that was in a bit of a bloodthirsty place after the initial recovery. And I picked up Tom Kratman's book, A Desert Called Peace.
Good choice for a bloodthirsty place.
Yeah, and it starts with the hero crucifying a bunch of insurgents.
Yep.
I was in the mood for that.
Yeah.
I was really in the mood for that.
So I now have, just so you know, I now have this mental picture of you lying in a hospital bed, IVs, some bandages and stuff, holding up the paperback of A Desert Called Peace, reading the first 10 pages, closing the book and going, I'm here for this.
Well, it's close. I actually didn't read it in the hospital. Like I got out of the hospital, but I was on a walker in casts, both in front. Michelle actually would get really mad because I'd read Tom's book, and this held true for most of Tom's books going on. And Tom is as much philosopher as he is fiction author and military philosopher specifically. Like he is, he's writing about how to train for war, and he has characters that take you through the process, but he really deeply cares about the proper way to train and prepare an army to be victorious in war. And as a young lieutenant who was very zealous about that concept, who had already lost men in battle in Iraq, it wasn't just that he crucified a bunch of insurgents, although again that was very cathartic. It was that he was very rigorous and very detailed and cared very much about what we should do to take 18-year-old kids and give them the best chance of surviving and winning on the battlefield. And to be frank, I don't think every military officer had that level of commitment that I served with. So, and that was one thing that drove me up the wall in the Army. So that tangent aside, so I read his books. Sorry, that was a very, I call it.
That was good.
My wife's family is very Irish and they tell very long stories. I call that O'Donnelling a story. But
it's interesting. Those anecdotes are interesting, I think.
Thank you. So I read his first 3 or 4 books, and I discovered Baines Bar, the old Baines Bar. This was 2 iterations ago, back when it was a very, it was a very old kind of primitive message board, but it was awesome. You could go in and interact with authors you liked, if you liked the book. And Tom's always been very active. So I went in and I just thanked him for writing the book and told him, an abbreviated version of who I was and what I'd been through, and that his book really spoke to me, and it kind of escalated from there. We stayed in touch via Baines Bar for many, many years. I'd talk to him about not just his books, but also what was going on in my various units. And he would provide a lot of advice, and a lot of mentorship from distance. So in a way, I never served under Tom, obviously, because we don't, our service dates don't overlap. But in some ways, I kind of feel like I did.
Sure.
Because he provided a lot of great advice.
Yeah.
When I was coming up. So
that's
it'll
really
be interesting
cool
to see what he says when you have him on the YouTube. He'll be like, yeah, this guy, like, he just wouldn't stop bugging me. So I don't know. Like, I let him try something. It wasn't terrible. So we published it.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. You, I should have put this cover up too. Man, somebody wants to
Terra Nova, right?
Terra Nova. Yeah. What did you had a story in that too, right? What did you write
that was actually the first thing that I wrote specifically for Tom. And it was, so Terra Nova briefly is a colony world that's actually multicultural. And not in the nice sense. There are competing cultures. It's not this was settled all by Norse people or all by sub-Saharan Africans. Like, no, this has representative groups from most of the cultures on Earth. And my story was about one of the UN peacekeeping forces that was there, that was a combination of Earthborn European troops and Zulu mercenaries from the colonists there. So I'd written that. I wrote a story about a novella about that. And he indulged me and let me write an actual novella for the anthology. And you had one in there too. I think about a Filipino helicopter pilot, if I remember, Filipina helicopter pilot, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, yes. So she was interestingly enough, she's from Earth. She was also part of the UN forces that were, but she's part of the. She was a U.S. pilot who was part of a group that was chopped to the UN for this mission out in Terra Nova, and she's of Filipina extraction. And my story was inspired by. Oh man, I should have looked up his name before I forgot. Was inspired by, there's a very famous incident known as the My Lai massacre.
Hugh Thompson.
Hugh Thompson, yes, thank you. I was like, I know it's like a normal name, or common, I should say, not normal. All names
and that's I got to meet him at West Point.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh
I
wow.
met Hugh Thompson briefly, yeah.
That would be very cool, because that dude struck me as a dude of incredible personal courage. And so if you're unfamiliar with the story of Hugh Thompson, the My Lai massacre was a terrible chapter where you had American troops committing atrocities against Vietnamese people who may or may not have been involved in the opposition. There's lots of disagreement on that point. That being said, there were a lot of older people, a lot of very young people, a lot of people who were
it was
not a good time,
and it was not a gray area. Like, there are things that happen in war where you're like, ugh, like, was that, like an artillery round goes astray and kills people that were not meant to kill, that were not meant to die. This was not that. This was not, oh, they were trying their best and people are human.
Right.
And made a mistake. Like, no, this was an atrocity. Yeah.
And it was malicious. And and people who, again, may or may not have been involved with the enemy were at that moment were innocent people who were unable to fight back. And and they were being massacred. So Hugh Thompson was a Huey pilot who saw this, was like, what the fuck? And I'm gonna have to put a language warning on this video. But seriously, he was like,
us? I'm sorry.
What's that? No, it's fine. I just will have to let the people know. But by all means, be yourself. I'll be myself. It'll be fine.
Okay.
But so he was like, what the fuck? And so landed his helicopter, put his Huey physically in between some of the villagers who were running away and some of the American troops who were chasing them, and got out and threatened these Americans, like, you're not going to shoot these people. I'll shoot you first, and then came back and reported the incident. So it was in large part because of him that we know what happened. And I cannot imagine the intestinal fortitude or testicular fortitude, pick your metaphor, that it must have taken to stand up and do that, especially at that time and place, because emotions were very high. Emotions are always high in wartime, right? Your buddies are being killed. You yourself may be killed, right? Is not a safe place. But to be able to stand up and say, this is wrong. This is not who we are. This is not what we are here for. And you need to be held accountable for that. I find that admirable. So,
well, and what's telling about My Lai and incidents in Afghanistan and Iraq, where we haven't had, to the best of my knowledge, we've never had an atrocity that large committed by U.S. troops in Iraq or Afghanistan, but we have had people who have gone off the reservation and committed murder against non-combatants and worse. Well, worse is debatable, but it's gotten bad on occasion. And the common thread, aside from people with psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies on a case-by-case basis, is when you have a unit that is in an occupation of a country where the populace is, there's a gradient of friendly to hostile amongst the non-combatants, and you start taking casualties and you never really make contact with the enemy, but you keep taking casualties and you don't seem to be doing anything about it.
Right.
And then
it doesn't seem like there is anything you can do about it except,
And then that's when discipline breaks and those atrocities happen. In my opinion, and based on my study of history, the more active you are, because again, like the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are a huge can of worms, but we at least did try to break insurgent cells and do basic detective work to try to catch insurgents. So while very often it felt useless, there was something to be done. And I think that combined with the fact that we took much lighter numbers of KIA than our parents and grandparents did in Vietnam. Degree matters, right? The level of stress you're taking is different. And that while life sucked in Iraq and Afghanistan from time to time, it didn't suck as bad as it did for a unit on the line in Vietnam for the most part, with exceptions, with notable exceptions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I don't want to speak for, I don't speak for every Iraq and Afghanistan veteran, obviously.
Right.
But most of us, there were days that were really bad, but overall the biggest threat was boredom, for most people on most deployments. Is the truth. So yeah.
I've actually heard that said about Vietnam too.
Sure.
For most people,
on
most deployments, most of the days were extremely boring.
Yeah, but punji sticks, man.
Right.
It's just that, like, my dad was a Vietnam vet. He was a helicopter pilot, actually. So,
did I know that? I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, well, he did. He flew. He started out in guns and then went to scouts. Because he could get more hours on that airfield. It was less expensive to keep the OH-58 in the air than it was to keep the AH-64 in the air. So So he switched over to scouts at that point.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. It's funny how many people I meet that they're like, oh yeah, my dad flew helicopters, or my uncle flew helicopters, my grandpa flew helicopters.
I mean, that is a skill that I respect a lot. Because I've been up in both a fixed wing aircraft and a helicopter with my dad. And like, I'm not saying it doesn't take skill to be a fixed wing pilot, but to keep it going straight and in the right direction is a fairly simple exercise. In a fixed wing aircraft, it is not a simple exercise in a rotary wing aircraft.
Did your dad let you try to hover?
Yes and no. I couldn't.
No one can, man. No one can. It's the thing about the thing that struck me and that always strikes so several times in my career, because I'm a very experienced instructor pilot. I've had the opportunity to fly with senior officers who are fixed wing pilots, but they're in a supervisory position over helicopter units. So we do a thing called key staff, where they go through a very abbreviated syllabus, basically just to kind of introduce them to, hey, this is how a helicopter works. These are how our operations work, to give them some situational awareness on what we're doing and why, and why we're making the decisions we're making, et cetera.
Yeah.
And it's always a really good time, but because, to a man, every single one of them is like, I have always wanted to try this. I don't know what I'm doing. It's and it's a lot of fun, but inevitably they're relieved once we transition into forward flight, because once it's moving forward and actually flying instead of hovering, the helicopter behaves a lot more like a fixed wing aircraft. And so that's something that they like understand on the instinctive muscle memory level. But when we get in the hover and trying to keep it into a coordinated hover and keep it in one spot while everything is moving, that mastering that concept of dynamic stability is something that the only way to do it is it takes practice, lots and lots of practice.
Yeah.
I think it took me, I think it probably took me a couple of weeks before I could hover properly. So, but I wasn't exactly a quick study in pilot training.
I will say, it's so funny because there's enough of a gap between me and my dad that hardly anyone was still in when I got in.
Mm-hmm.
But my probability and statistics professor was a young lieutenant who got to my dad's battalion in Fort Hood.
Uh-huh.
And my dad was the SIP. He was the senior instructor pilot there. And he helped that guy out, like getting his shit square, basically.
Yeah.
And so I probably made it through Prop and Stat because of that lieutenant colonel.
That's pretty cool. Like that would be a cool opportunity to have like one of my mentor's children come and be able to mentor them in turn,
Yeah. No. And I'm in the Army. Like I come from an Army family.
Uh-huh.
If you're a Watson and you have outdoor plumbing, you were almost certainly in the Army.
How many generations back do you go?
Everyone that I know of. So
really?
my great grandfather, Lawrence Watson the First, was Spanish American. Then great grandfather didn't actually go to World War I, but rode with Blackjack Pershing in Mexico.
That's cool.
As a cavalryman. My grandpa was in World War II in the Pacific.
Yeah.
Has a Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, wounded multiple times. He joined the Army at age 17 in 1942. And by the time the war was over, he was a first sergeant, E8.
Yeah.
Because he was still alive and hadn't run,
Yeah.
Wow. And then my dad was a warrant officer. Fought in Vietnam and stayed in up through the 90s.
Cool.
And then my older brother was enlisted in the infantry. I'm actually the first commissioned officer in the family, to which I get no end of shit, of course.
Imagine.
Yeah.
That's pretty.
I knew what I was signing on for.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Not a surprise, guys. I went to West Point.
Yeah. They're both like my dad. He passed away many years ago, but when I got accepted to West Point, he was both immensely proud and then
totally disappointed.
Join in giving me crap with my older brother and my uncles, like awesome. Both at the same time. They were in parallel. So that was really
awesome.
Fun. Yeah. So
we so I'm 3rd generation Air Force, which the Air Force
only has 3 generations. That means you were in on the ground floor.
My grandpa wasn't quite Army Air Corps, but wasn't too long after the Air Force became its own separate service that he joined. So yeah, he enlisted, and then he actually commissioned through OCS when that was a thing in the Air Force, and he went to Vietnam 3 times and was so his job title was combat controller. Today, a combat controller is like
FAC-A,
like special tactics and AFSOC and all that. Not quite the same thing as back then, but basically he was like a FAC A, but on the ground, right? So he called bomb strikes for linebacker and linebacker 2. And
nice.
It was pretty classified up until it wasn't, which I don't know when that was.
Yeah.
But he actually was involved in some of the first precision guided strikes that
Nice.
carried out.
Nice. Some of the first laser guided stuff.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. TV guided stuff. Yeah. Pretty interesting stuff. So he did that. And then he also went to navigator school at some point and was a KC-135 navigator. And then both my parents joined the Air Force when I was about 6 years old, and they were JAGs. So totally different perspective on the military, but still very, very interesting. And then, I'm a helicopter pilot, and right now my oldest daughter is in Air Force ROTC in college at ECU.
Oh.
So I told her, I was like, if you decide to, continue with this and commission, you'll be 4th generation Air Force,
that's super cool. Does she want to fly, or does she have another MOS in mind?
No, yeah, she wants to fly.
Okay.
She wants to travel. So I think she's probably looking at strategic airlift. So like C-17s. Yeah.
I hear that's like a really good setup for later in life too.
It can be.
C-17 time is not harmful to your career.
No, it certainly can be. The airlines, they do favor fighter time because you get less of it. So it like counts. It counts 3 times as much because it's so much more expensive to fly a fighter. But heavy airlift time is they like that. The one thing that they like better than anything else, though, is astronaut time, which I thought was funny. Like, how many astronauts do you know that go be airplane pilots?
They also like the Medal of Honor. Like, they're really fond of that.
That's right. And how many DFCs do you have?
Yeah.
Like, none. I have an aerial achievement medal.
Yeah.
I thought that was funny.
Yeah, that is great. That's hilarious.
So what's next for you writing wise?
So currently, obviously, I have my component of the sequel to Romanov Rescue. That you are first chair on that, and I will confess, as your friend, to a little bit of glee on that one because you were in Japan for this first one. And I'm like, okay, your turn.
Yeah.
But no, I can't wait to see what you do with Tatiana and Anastasia and Maria.
Thank you.
But I've got my component of that'll come up basically as soon as you and Tom are done with the back and forth on your portions. I have the smallest portion of that one for the viewers. I'm third chair on that book. And then right now, what I'm really hot and heavy on is the 4th book of Tom's M-Day military thriller series. So it's this one is set in the midst of the Mexican drug war. And it's basically pitting M-Day, the mercenary regiment or private military contractor, if you want to use the buzzword, that he's written a couple books about versus the drug lords in Mexico. So I'm hot and heavy on that. It's super interesting. I've been reading a bunch of books by Ion Grillo. I think I'm saying that right. He's a British journalist who lives in Mexico. And I'm listening to Narconomics, which is both really disturbing and really fascinating, just looking at the cocaine trade and the other narcotics industries as a business. Being dispassionate about, okay, actually these are people moving a product, what actually matters to them and what will actually affect them. Super fascinating stuff. Really interesting to write. No dragons or spaceships, but it's still exciting and fun to write.
Well, techno thrillers Bain does techno thrillers too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I grew up on, I grew up on Heinlein and the Dragonlance books and obviously Tolkien. But I also grew up on Tom Clancy and, Larry Bond, Stephen Kuntz and Harold Coyle too. I grew up on the classic 80s and 90s techno thrillers too. So it's not like I didn't want to write them. I thought I was a science fiction and fantasy author. It turns out I'm actually also a techno thriller author.
That's awesome. I know what you mean. Like I thought that I was a science fiction fantasy author. Turns out I am a alternate history and noir author. And
I want to like just take a moment to say I really, really, really love Second Chance Angel. I can't wait
thank
for
you
the
so
sequel.
much.
Yeah. No, that was a really great book. I enjoyed that a great deal.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. I just talked with Griffin last week, and we talked about that a little bit. So it was a fun book to write. It's a fun. I mean, you're gonna get me on this soapbox. I feel like I talk about this every video, but that's what I love about noir, right? Is like you can literally insert it into any other genre and it makes something beautiful. So I don't know. Maybe we should do like a noir techno thriller mashup sometime. What do you think?
Well, and I don't know to ask you about this. Like, was this intentional or not? Because with the AI herself, Angel, were you channeling a little bit of Heinlein for that one? Because it put me in mind of, and forgive me, I'm a Heinlein geek, so I'm going to get a little obscure for some people. Time Enough for Love and Minerva, or Mike from The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. You know, these AI personalities that become real people in a very real sense of the world. I felt like it was a bit of an extrapolation on those themes. Maybe I'm not sure. Don't know if it was conscious or not, but it put me in mind of that in a really great way.
So I have to confess that I've never read those.
You should, but that's okay.
I've been told that I should, and I know that I should, but I have not made the time to do that yet. So
at least The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Time Enough for Love is really weird. I like that book, but it's weird.
Yeah.
The Moon
is
a
that
Harsh
the one
Mistress.
where you got the dude who's like super old and he has like generations of family? Yeah.
Yep, yeah. That one. Again, weird book. I like it, but I can understand why other people might bounce off of that one.
Sure.
But I love The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. It's I'd call it a landmark in the field.
I know. And like I said, I know that I should read these things. I've been told repeatedly that I should read these things. I just haven't made the time to.
You said earlier that that reading isn't his primary form of relaxation.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it's true for you, but I suspect it is, that it's no longer our primary form of relaxation either.
Like, to a certain extent, that's true. Although I will say when I do like need to just relax and tune something out, I've found lately that I've been reading romance novels. So like Regency romances lately have been my no work read. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Audiobooks help me a lot. Like just listening to good audiobooks helps me a lot because I'm consuming a book, but I don't have to, my editor brain doesn't kick in reading the actual novel.
The only time that I can successfully really listen to audiobooks, I find though, is when I'm driving, because otherwise I get restless, like I should be doing something else. But if I'm actually doing something else, then I find that I'm not paying attention to the audiobook.
That makes a lot of sense. I drive a lot, for one, in my day job, so I do have that opportunity. And the second thing is, Michelle and I will listen to, if we can agree on an audiobook, we'll listen to it together, and she'll knit or crochet or do calendar work, just do like some thoughtless planning stuff, and I'll do D&D prep or outlining. I can't write and read and listen to a book, obviously, at the same time, or even outline. But I can do like simple stuff to run that I need to get ready to run a game. So that's how we handle it.
Sure. What games do you play?
Largely D&D. I play a lot of D&D, but then I also I run for my kids largely, and my wife and my brother-in-law too.
Yeah.
But we just homebrew the crap out of the game system. At first it was to simplify it for the kids, and now it's like just to give it the wrinkles we want. So I will yank anything from any system I think is cool. Largely D20 based.
Yeah.
Just about all of it. If we're not up for D&D, then it's Settlers of Catan for the kiddos, or they really love Spades. Spades is the unofficial game of the United States Army. It's what you do when you have nothing else to do. So at one point we were in between services at church, and I had a deck of cards, and there was no Sunday school that day for some reason. So I taught the kids how to play Spades. Really good. Really quite good.
We play a game. It is similar to Spades in that it is a whist variant. It's a game my husband's family plays called Oh Hell. And it is aptly named. It's very much like Spades, except you play you play 10 hands. And on the first hand, you deal 10 cards. On the second hand, you deal 9, 8, 7, yada, 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 until you're having a hand with only one card. And the trump suit changes every hand because when you deal out the cards and you flip over the next card, and whatever the suit that is showing is the trump suit.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And you don't have partners. It's, every man for himself. And yeah, there's a couple of other variants and stuff too, or a couple of other differences, but it's really fun. And it's very interesting because the number of players is not fixed. You can play with, 4, 5, 6 players, and the number of players changes the dynamic significantly because there's more cards out. And so it's a lot more like card county, I guess, because you're looking and you're judging the probability of that, the high suit card, the offsuit ace in your hand is going to take a book versus being trumped. And so it's a lot of fun. But that game has made me curse out my father-in-law, who is one of the sweetest men on the planet, but he is absolutely vicious when playing this game.
I know it's basically have you played Settlers of Catan?
Yeah.
Okay, so you played it. We have a rule that it's you stop at 3 games for the night.
Yeah.
Or you can do 2 games and play 2 nights in a row, and you have to stop.
Yeah.
Because after that point, my brother-in-law and my wife are going to beat each other's throats. like you play 4 games, on a night, like somebody gonna get hurt real bad. It's gonna be bad.
When we moved here, I got plugged into a game group. Not we would do a little bit of tabletop role-playing game, but it was just we would get together and play games. And they were already doing this before Easy and I arrived, and they invited us in to join them. And Catan was banned from this group because they had played it one evening and had gotten so contentious that they're like, we're not going to be friends anymore, so we're just not going to play Catan anymore.
It's the goddamn thief. There is no way. As you get closer and closer to 10 points, there is no way not to take that personally. I don't know anyone professional enough.
Yeah. Well, and especially because this group, there's several personalities in this group, my own included. I will admit to this, that when we can't win, we're gonna play to spoil. Yeah. So when you're playing to spoil and you're buying up roads that you don't need, and someone else is like, what the fuck are you doing? You don't even need those. And they're like, no, but you do. And so I'm taking them. Like, it's hard not to take that personally. You are correct.
So, there's a family legend in my wife's family of the time that her little brother beat her at chess. And he was so frustrating that she literally, and my wife's very mild-mannered, by and large. She's a very reserved person, very polite. She flung the chessboard across the room, like their chess piece is still broken from it. And it plays out today in that, like, if we're playing Catan, the 3 of us, brother-in-law, wife, sometimes she will go after him when I have a clear lead. Because and it's not entirely irrational. My brother-in-law is like a Vulcan. Like, he has a brain like a calculator. He's super good at games. And he's very good at like finding like, this is the optimal strategy, and if you do this, you are very likely to win. And we both play a little bit. We both play a little bit more by gut than that. And so, like, there was one game where she just tried to strangle him in the cradle, like day 1 keeps going home in every turn. Meanwhile, I've got longest road and 2 nights
over here. You're like, you guys do what you do. I'm gonna like make money. And
well, and it's like that's when we established the rule of when we had to stop, because I won and it wasn't even fun because they were so pissed at each other. I was like, guys, we need to kick back a little.
Right. When it stops being fun. Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's funny to talk about that stuff now, but there's so one of my friends who was involved in that game group, his name is James. Great guy. Like, I hope that I can convince him to come to LibertyCon someday, because I'd love to introduce you to. I think you'd really like him.
I can't wait for LibertyCon. I'm so excited.
I know, me too. Anyway, James is like that. Like he's a strategist, right? He'll figure out the optimal strategy, and he's been playing cards with he's from the Midwest, so he's been playing cards with his family, various games since he was like 2 years old, right? So he's very good at that piece that I mentioned of OHEL, of looking at what's in your hand, looking at what everyone else is holding, and calculating the probability of, okay, I think that this card is going to go, or no, this card's, I'm not going to take a book with this one.
Yeah.
So we were playing OHEL. I love telling this story. We were playing OHEL, and the dynamic of the game changes as you get down to less and less cards in your hand.
Yeah.
And there's a rule where you have to call your shot, right? Like you have to announce the number of books that you're going to take. Yeah, you bid. Yeah. And if you bid and you take more than you bid, then you get the number of books you take. If you bid and you take your bid, you get that number plus 10 for calling your shot correctly. If you bid all of the available books,
you get negative. Yeah.
If you fall short, you get 0. You just get 0.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If you bid all of the available books and take all of the available books, you get a 20-point bonus, because you get 10 points for taking all of them, 10 points for calling your shot correctly, and then the number of books that ends up being, right? Cool. So when you get down to the card, to that actually becomes possible when you get down to the hands where you have like 3, 2, 1 card in your hand, and it's always going to happen on the last hand because there's only one book to take. So you bid that book, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So so we were playing, and I see that James is doing this calculation. So rather than strategize the game, I like to strategize the other players sometimes. And so I see that he's doing this, and we deal, and I have absolute trash in my hand. I'm not taking anything, but it comes around, right? To me, I'm like, third to bid right before him. And I'm like, and they bid 0. The other 2 people have bid 0, and he's last to bid because he's got the lead or whatever. Mm-hmm. Or no, he's the person next to him has the lead. Anyway, sorry, I'm not trying to teach you the game, I promise. But I'm looking at it. Yeah, I will teach you, and we will play, and it will be fun. But there, I'm watching. I'm seeing him calculating, and he's trying not to have tells, but I can tell he's excited about what's in his hand. It comes around, and I very calmly, I'm like 3, and he's like, "What?" I'm like, "You heard me." And everyone else is like, "Oh my god!" And he's like, "Well, hell!" So he bids like 1, right? He takes. And it threw the entire thing off, and I didn't take a single book. But he was like, "You threw off my whole strategy," and I'm like, "Honey, I know that was the point." So sometimes you can play the game, sometimes you can play the players.
The last time we played, I managed to go nil, which is to take none, which is worth 100 points in spades.
Yeah,
if you call it correctly and don't take a single one. I had the little joker. Like, I had the little joker, and I had the ace of hearts in there that I had. Everything else was crap. Everything else was crap. And I had a ton of hearts. So I was like, okay, like, I'm not going to have to throw out the ace until I can throw it off. But yeah, I went nil with the little joker. I managed to get that under the big joker too. But yeah, no, that was tense.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, I'd love spades. I would love to do the tournament they do every year, but it's like you have to commit for what is that, like 4 hours a night, something like that at LibertyCon. So
yeah. Well, we've been talking for about an hour, although as usual, when hanging out with you, it seems like much less.
Yeah. We definitely need to hang out more.
Yeah, we should. Thanks again for coming and talking to me. Where can people find you?
So I am on the Facebooks, not as frequently as I used to be, but pretty frequently. You can find me there. I'm Justin Watson. I look like this. And I am also on Instagram as gosh, what is my handle? I'll email it to you. You can put liner notes.
I will put it in the description for sure.
And then www.justinwatsonbooks.com. I have a website that is still somewhat under construction, but you'll see the Romanov Rescue, bright and pretty there on the front. And yeah, that is me. Yeah. And like I said earlier, our book, no, it's over here on the screen, is
available now in bookstores everywhere, the Romanov Rescue. You can also find it on Bain.com if you prefer to purchase your books that way. So yeah, it's we didn't really talk much about what it's about, but it is an alternate history that postulates what happens if some of the Romanov children survive and unite the imperialist Russians in the Russian Civil War, and how does that change everything else? So thanks so much, guys, for hanging out with us. And go check out Justin's website, check out his books and his short stories. I will, as I promised, leave links below. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks for having me, Casey. Bye.
Yeah, thanks for being here, man.